Alright, good morning-ish, afternoon-ish in this earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico. Starting an as of yet unnamed oil painting. I'm just gonna paint it yellow. I don't know what this is gonna be yet, but it needs to be gold. So, I'm gonna start with that, and I'll hit it with a little bit of loose mineral spirits just to sort of moisten the surface, and then see where it goes from there.
So I went on,
about right there is fine.
And we got a drug enforcement administration permit at the Evergreen State College. I went on, I published 4 new species in the genus Psilocybe. Psilocybe azurescens, Psilocybe leniformans, Psilocybe sarcoidosa, and Psilocybe widei. These are species that are new to science. We were legally able to grow lots of them and became very popular on campus. I thought everyone was a DBA agent. So my mantra is nature provides, I don't. So I'm very happy to show people how to identify them. So, okay, so let's think about the influence of psilocybin mushrooms on human evolution. But first, let's consider this. I'm going to lay out a circumstantial argument. This is a hypothesis. I cannot prove this. Maybe no one can prove this. The gold-eating monkey consumes up to 35% of its diet is fungi. More than 12 times its body weight in a mushroom called Astropolypus. Now, he is one of 23 primates that are known to consume mushrooms in quantity, that are known to identify which ones are poisonous and which ones are edible. So think about that. In the primate history, 23 humans being one, with 23 primates knowledgeable about the consumption of mushrooms, how far does that ancestral knowledge go back in the evolution of humans? Well, the late great Terence McKenna, who's a wonderful friend to many of us here, he came out with the stone egg theory. Now, I disagree with Terence on lots of things, but one critic said that only 5% of things that Terence said is true. It's phenomenal. I would agree. So Terence, I call the stone belly hypothesis, is a theory based on the fact, a hypothesis based on conjecture. So, but Terence's thing was that, and it was echoed initially by Roland Fisher in an article in 1970, increasing visual acuity when you eat ingest psilocybin mushrooms. So, basically the theory or hypothesis goes as such. As our primate ancestors came out of the trees, we were on across the savannas tracking animals. And it is you are hunters or track animals, what do you look for? You look for footprints, you look for scat, you look for poop. They may be beyond your visual horizon. But in the course of you looking for these animals and tracking them, you encounter piles of poop. And what is fruiting out of the poop in the tropics and subtropics? The most substantial psychoactive mushroom in the world, in terms of mass, is Psilocybe cubensis. It's growing here on elephant dung. 200,000 years ago, there was a sudden increase in our cerebral cortex and our frontal lobes. It is unexplained. And we migrated into Europe, Homo sapiens did 40,000 years ago, displaced Homo erectus and Neanderthals in 2 to 4,000 years. How does that happen? So there was a quantum increase in the cranium size, and those of us who eat these mushrooms, I mean, it's mathematical fractals, the heavens open up, 3-dimensionality, you look into the heavens, you vomit. So you're hungry, you're traveling with your clan, you find these mushrooms, you're hungry, you eat them, you share the food, and your whole clan goes through this community experience. Okay, that's reasonable. I mean, it's highly plausible. This is what you would run into. Well, it happens not once or twice, not 10 times, not 100 times, not 1,000 times. Millions of times. Over millions of years. If you know anything about epigenesis, the stimulus response on the genome, it can upregulate gene sequences in response to environmental stimuli. Psilocybin is very closely related to serotonin. It's a serotonin antagonist, becomes a neurotransmitter. I believe that Terence's belief in the stone ape hypothesis is highly reasonable. I believe that it's very likely the evolution of humans took a quantum leap and ingested psilocybin mushrooms over millions of years by millions of primates, and then one third of those primates burst into being as we are today. So, Psilocybe cubensis goes with Alphodon, Palodon, all sorts of ungulates. They cohabitats with another mushroom, which is also extremely potent, and they show up in common, called Copelandian cyanescens, or it's a Copelandian camelus. But there has been a new surge in interest of psilocybin mushrooms just recently, and CIIS, is specializing in educating people about this. But across the United States in particular, microdosing with psilocybin by computer coders has become rampant. At the TED conference last year, I had no less than 6 coders come up to me at TED saying, "Paul, you know about microdosing with psilocybin?" No shit, sure luck. So this is backing up below threshold where you're not getting intoxicated, but basically it's like taking a psilocybin vitamin, that it leads to neurogenesis. Now, this has been in Forbes magazine, the Wall Street Journal, you can look this up. The idea is to increase creativity. With neurogenesis, with more brain matter basically, with more connections, ideas are flowed much more rapidly, and I think this could be the next quantum leap in the evolution of humans, is the deliberate use of psilocybin and microdosing for helping us to increase cognition and imagination. So, now, an interesting, several studies have come out. John Hopkins has a lot on this, many of you know about that. But a very interesting study came out on fear conditioning. And basically, a stimulus response gives the rodents, but basically, he gave them trained to be afraid of the stimulus. Then under the doses of psilocybin, they could overcome that fear response and retrain those rodents so they would not have that effect. Well, let's look at that. Overcome the fear response. PTSD, rape victims, people who've been abused, people associate a gunshot with, a fear because of their wartime experiences. So if psilocybin helps you overcome fear response, then it seems to me that psilocybin induces courage. Psilocybin induces kindness, empathy. You're in love with your family, you're in love with the earth, you're in love with existence. You have this overwhelming feelings of wellness. And if that's true, and I think it is, then by God, these are leadership skills. If I can do what leaders to be engaging in psilocybin at a time they so desperately need them to. So, okay. I'm going to do a background on mycology and mycelium from an ecological and evolutionary perspective. This is where Dusty and I like to go to church on Sundays. You look at an ecosystem, in terms of the mycelial components. There are saprophytic fungi that break down dead wood. There are the endophytic fungi that grow within trees and throughout the leaves, literally hundreds of them per tree sometimes. The mycorrhizal fungi that many of you know about, there's infuses in the root zones. I highly recommend Suzanne Samard's TED Talk that just got published. And then the parasitic fungi that kill living trees and plants, and then oftentimes they grow saprophytically. So when you're looking at all these, scientists realized about 10 years ago, in doing sections and looking at sections of plants under the microscope, they could see these threads, these filaments of fungi. They thought they were contaminants, they're parasites. It took a few brave mycologists to say, no, those are not parasitic fungi, those are endophytic fungi. In fact, all plants are fungi. This begs the question, anyone who's doing work on ethnomedicines based on plants, what is the fungal contribution of the endophytic fungi within the plant when people are attributing the benefits of plants having certain properties, how many of those properties are attributable actually to the fungi. So, excellent book I would recommend is Mycorrhizal Symbiosis. 95% of those threads you see is mycelium. It extends the rhizosphere, we call it the microsphere, literally by thousands of times. And the fungal networks help plants communicate. Now, I postulated this about 15 years ago, but an excellent study came out just a few years ago on fungal communication. Basically, the experiment is very simple. 5 bean plants, separate pots. They introduced aphids to the first bean plant, alkaloids, anti-aphid compounds, chemicals upregulated from the plant that was exposed to the aphids. The other 4 ones that were in separate pots, but nearby, did not produce those same anti-aphid alkaloids. We repeated the experiment and put all the plants in the same common soil, and let the mycelium underneath network together between the roots, the rhizosphere. When they introduced aphids to the first plant, what happened? The 4 other plants upregulated the expression of the alkaloids that fight the aphids for multiple contact. That was the first really discrete experiment to show that the mycelial networks of communication works. There are unified ecosystems, and there are these communication channels that are occurring underground. The mycelium can have many different types. This is what I call happy mycelium, rapidly forking mycelium. And here's a 10-day sequence of mycelium growing in a petri dish. Yeah, it worked. And at the tips of this is these cells are multinucleate, they're polynucleate. There's literally can be hundreds of nuclei per cell. Later on, they segregate and typically have 2 nuclei per cell. Well, because of these hundreds of nuclei per cell, it's a prime environment for epigenesis, for experimentation. So when you look at the mycelium as it grows out, and it is constantly forking and dividing, and these nuclei are resorting, if it encounters a new toxin, a new insect, a new potential food source, if these nuclei encode for that enzyme that breaks down the potential food source as a nutrient reservoir, the mycelium can use, what happens, the mycelium surges. And that information back channels then to the network of mycelium. So these are self-learning membranes. The mycelium is a fabric-like network, and then under the influence, typically of forced stimuli, introduction of water, mushrooms from that, rains, mushrooms come up. As it rains, the mycelium comes up, exhales carbon dioxide, inhales oxygen. That's the second stimulus. When it rains, the temperatures drop, so there's a drop in temperature. And because of evaporation, that's the third one. The fourth one is quite surprising to many, is light. 99% of all mushrooms require light, they're phototropic, they're photosynthetic. And then the mushrooms then begin to emerge. It's the first indication of primordial formation. I spent many years scanning under a microscopist. So these are from my microglass, and there's the mushrooms forming over 5 days. Mushrooms do not have a good immune system. They're ripened fruit, like a peach. They attract herbivores or mycovores. And so the mycelium is resident in the ecosystem for months, years. It has a very active immune system. The mushrooms are called typically the fruit bodies. But I'm fascinated with decomposition. My manly picture here. And so we take wood chips at our facility, we add mycelium, lots of things happen. Ultimately, we generate soil. Mushroom mycelium are the grand molecular discoverers of nature, the soil magicians. They take wood or animal tissue and they make it into soil, and the sequence of decomposition spins nutrients off to many other life cycles. Well, unfortunately today, because of our practices, we only have 10 to 15% of the wood debris. And yet, 70% of our soils are composed of microbial mass, and of this mass, 30% is fungal. So when you pick up soil that's healthy, a third of that mass is fungal tissue. So because of our repetitive logging and cutting practices, we are basically robbing the nutritional bank that is necessary for the mushroom mycelium to grow. Now mycelium produces all sorts of products, carbon dioxide being one, I'll talk about that in a second, but mycelium can come to a dry substrate and liberate water, create water. Oxygen is being inhaled by the mycelium, combines with hydrogen, H2Os form. The mycelium hydrates habitats as it grows, generating its own water, so it generates the moisture that then can make the the substrate more appetizing. But let's look at something that's truly phenomenal. This is the Columbia River, Washington State, where Dusty and I live, and this is the John Day Wilderness. We're going to fly into this zone here. This is the largest organism in the world. A mycelial map, 2,200 acres in size. 1,665 football fields in context. It is a mycelial membrane. It is one cell wall thick. Surrounded by hundreds of millions of microbes that will consume it. We have 5 or 6 skin layers that protect us from infection. Mycelium has one cell wall on the opposite side of which is all these hungry microbes that would love to consume it. How is it possible? It is impossible because it's a constant viral communication with the ecosystem. Because of epigenesis, it develops immune systems to prevent pathogens and parasites from harming it. Now, I'd like to mention, I took this photograph. I hired a small airplane. I went up there to look for it. The pilot and I, we couldn't find it. We had the wrong coordinates. There was probably some literature. We went back. The next day, we were right on top of it. We weren't up high enough. So we went back, and we circled up. We got up to 14,500 feet. On this tiny little airplane. It's actually a cloth-covered airplane on the bush pilot from Alaska. And I said, there it is. I can see it. And I said, I think I'm going to faint. And the pilot goes, me too. I said, let me get a photograph first. He goes, we got to get down. And we go from sea level to 14,500 feet. 1 hour. That was just too much to climb. So it's the best photograph of the largest organism in the world. Anyway, so it kills trees. And so then what happens is the Forest Service comes through and they log this area.
Alright, I think that might be done for the moment. It's pretty saturated. I like the line work, I like the gestural work, making up the background, the gold tone is nice. Sort of improvised along with the flow of the strokes and ended up with something like that. So, we'll see where it goes from here. I like the start. That's Adam Sturch podcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico. Working on oil painting as of yet unnamed. I'll probably figure something out before I post it. So, have a good afternoon, Earth.